The Huns were a nomadic people who lived in Central Asia, the Caucasus, and Eastern Europe between the 4th and 6th century AD. According to European tradition, they were first reported living east of the Volga River, in an area that was part of Scythia at the time. The Huns' arrival is associated with the migration westward of an Iranian people, the Alans. By 370 AD, the Huns had arrived on the Volga, and by 430 the Huns had established a vast, if short-lived, dominion in Europe, conquering the Goths and many other Germanic peoples living outside of Roman borders, and causing many others to flee into Roman territory. The Huns, especially under their king Attila, made frequent and devastating raids into the Eastern Roman Empire. In 451, the Huns invaded the western Roman province of Gaul, where they fought a combined army of Romans and Visigoths at the Battle of the Catalaunian Fields, and in 452 they invaded Italy. After Attila's death in 453, the Huns ceased to be a major threat to Rome and lost much of their empire following the Battle of Nidau. Descendants of the Huns, or successors with similar names, are recorded by neighboring populations to the south, east, and west as having occupied parts of Eastern Europe and Central Asia from about the 4th to 6th centuries. Variants of the Hun name are recorded in the Caucasus until the early 8th century. In the 18th century, the French scholar Joseph de Guines became the first to propose a link between the Huns and the Xiongnu people, who were northern neighbors of China from the 3rd century BC to the late 1st century AD. Since Guines' time, considerable scholarly effort has been devoted to investigating such a connection. The issue remains controversial. The relationships with other entities such as the Iranian Huns and the Indian Huna people has also been disputed. Very little is known about Hunnic culture and very few archaeological remains have been conclusively associated with the Huns. They are believed to have used bronze cauldrons and to have performed artificial cranial deformation. No description exists of the Hunnic religion of the time of Attila, but practices such as divination are attested, and the existence of shamans likely. It is also known that the Huns had a language of their own, however only 3 words and personal names attest to it. Economically, they are known to have practiced a form of nomadic pastoralism. As their contact with the Roman world grew, their economy became increasingly tied with Rome through tribute, raiding, and trade. They do not seem to have had a unified government when they entered Europe, but rather to have developed a unified tribal leadership in the course of their wars with the Romans. The Huns ruled over a variety of peoples who spoke various languages and some of whom maintained their own rulers. Their main military technique was mounted archery. The Huns may have stimulated the Great Migration, a contributing factor in the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. The memory of the Huns also lived on in various Christian saints' lives, where the Huns play the roles of antagonists, as well as in Germanic heroic legend, where the Huns are variously antagonists or allies to the Germanic main figures. In Hungary, a legend developed based on medieval chronicles that the Hungarians, and the Székely ethnic group in particular, are descended from the Huns. However, mainstream scholarship dismisses a close connection between the Hungarians and Huns. Modern culture generally associates the Huns with extreme cruelty and barbarism. Origin. The origins of the Huns and their links to other steppe people remain uncertain. Scholars generally agree that they originated in Central Asia but disagree on the specifics of their origins. Classical sources assert that they appeared in Europe suddenly around 370. Most typically, Roman writers' attempts to elucidate the origins of the Huns simply equated them with earlier steppe peoples. Roman writers also repeated a tale that the Huns had entered the domain of the Goths while they were pursuing a wild stag, or else one of their cows that had gotten loose, across the Kerch Strait into Crimea. Discovering the land good, they then attacked the Goths. Jordanes Getica relates that the Goths held the Huns to be offspring of unclean spirits and Gothic witches, relation to the Xiongnu and other peoples called Huns. Since Joseph de Guines in the 18th century, modern historians have associated the Huns who appeared on the borders of Europe in the 4th century AD with the Xiongnu who had invaded China from the territory of present-day Mongolia between the 3rd century BC and the 2nd century AD. Due to the devastating defeat by the Chinese Han dynasty, the northern branch of the Xiongnu had retreated northwestward. Their descendants may have migrated through Eurasia and consequently they may have some degree of cultural and genetic continuity with the Huns. Scholars also discuss the relationship between the Xiongnu, the Huns, and a number of people in Central Asia who were also known as or came to be identified with the name Hun or Iranian Huns. The most prominent of these were Chionites, the Kidarites, and the Hephthalites. The campaigns of the Huns under Attila in Europe, leading to their defeat at the Catalaunian plains in 451 AD, occur at roughly the same time as the conflicts between the Kidarites and the Sasanian Empire and the Gupta Empire in southern Asia. The Sasanian Empire temporarily lost to the Kidarites in 453 AD, falling into a tributary relationship, while the Gupta Empire repelled the Kidarites in 455 AD, under Emperor Skandikta. It is almost as if the imperialist empire in the east and west had combined their response to a simultaneous Hunnic threat across Eurasia. In the end, Europe succeeded in repelling the Huns, and their power there quickly vanished, but in the east, both the Sasanian Empire and the Gupta Empire were left much weakened. Otto J. Mencken-Helfen was the first to challenge the traditional approach, based primarily on the study of written sources, and to emphasize the importance of archaeological research. Since Mencken-Helfen's work, the identification of the Xiongnu as the Huns' ancestors has become controversial. Additionally, several scholars have questioned the identification of the Iranian Huns with the European Huns. Walter Pohl cautions that none of the great confederations of steppe warriors was ethnically homogeneous, and the same name was used by different groups for reasons of prestige, or by outsiders to describe their lifestyle or geographic origin. It is therefore futile to speculate about identity or blood relationships between Xiongnu, Hephthalites, and Attila's Huns, for instance. All we can safely say is that the name Huns, in late antiquity, described prestigious ruling groups of steppe warriors. Recent scholarship, particularly by Yunjin Kim and Étienne de Lavassière, has revived the hypothesis that the Huns and the Xiongnu are one and the same. De Lavassière argues that ancient Chinese and Indian sources used Xiongnu and Hun to translate each other, and that the various Iranian Huns were similarly identified with the Xiongnu. Kim believes that the term Hun was not primarily an ethnic group, but a political category, and argues for a fundamental political and cultural continuity between the Xiongnu and the European Huns, as well as between the Xiongnu and the Iranian Huns. Name and etymology. The name Hun is attested in classical European sources as Greek omicron nu omicron iota and Latin Huni or Chuni. John Malalas records their name as omicron nu alpha. Another possible Greek variant may be chi omicron nu omicron iota, although this group's identification with the Huns is disputed. Classical sources also frequently use the names of older and unrelated steppe nomads instead of the name Hun, calling them Masajdi, Scythians, and Cimmerians, among other names. The etymology of Hun is unclear. Various proposed etymologies generally assume at least that the names of the various Eurasian groups known as Huns are related. There have been a number of proposed Turkic etymologies, deriving the name variously from Turkic on, Ona, Kun, Kun, Gun, a plural suffix supposedly meaning people, Kun, and Hun. Otto Mencken-Helfen dismisses all of these Turkic etymologies as mere guesses. Mencken-Helfen himself proposes an Iranian etymology, from a word akin to Avestan Hunara, Hunaravant, and suggests that it may originally have designated a rank rather than an ethnicity. Robert Werner has suggested an etymology from Tocharian Ku, suggesting based on the fact that the Chinese called the Xiongnu dogs that the dog was the totem animal of the Hunnic tribe. He also compares the name Masajdi, noting that the element Saka in that name means dog. Others such as Harold Bailey, S. Parlato, and Jamshid Choksi have argued that the name derives from an Iranian word akin to Avestan's Iona, and was a generalized term meaning hostiles, opponents. Christopher Atwood dismisses this possibility on phonological and chronological grounds. While not arriving at an etymology per se, Atwood derives the name from the Ongi River in Mongolia, which was pronounced the same or similar to the name Xiongnu, and suggests that it was originally a dynastic name rather than an ethnic name. Physical appearance. Ancient descriptions of the Huns are uniform in stressing their strange appearance from a Roman perspective. These descriptions typically caricature the Huns as monsters. Jordanes stressed that the Huns were short of stature, had tanned skin and round and shapeless heads. Various writers mention that the Huns had small eyes and flat noses. The Roman writer Priscus gives the following eyewitness description of Attila: short of stature, with a broad chest and a large head, his eyes were small, his beard thin and sprinkled with gray, and he had a flat nose and tanned skin, showing evidence of his origin. Many scholars take these to be unflattering depictions of East Asian racial characteristics. Mencken-Helfen argues that, While many Huns had East Asian racial characteristics, they were unlikely to have looked as Asiatic as the Yakut or Tungus. He notes that archaeological finds of presumed Huns suggest that they were a racially mixed group containing only some individuals with East Asian features. Kim similarly cautions against seeing the Huns as a homogeneous racial group, while still arguing that they were partially or predominantly of Mongoloid extraction. Some archaeologists have argued that archaeological finds have failed to prove that the Huns had any Mongoloid features at all, and some scholars have argued that the Huns were predominantly Caucasian in appearance. Other archaeologists have argued that Mongoloid features are found primarily among members of the Hunnic aristocracy, which, however, also included Germanic leaders who were integrated into the Hun polity. Kim argues that the composition of the Huns became progressively more Caucasian during their time in Europe. He notes that by the Battle of Chalon, the vast majority of Attila's entourage and troops appears to have been of European origin, while Attila himself seems to have had East Asian features. Genetics. Dombo et al. 2018 found that the Huns were of mixed East Asian and West Eurasian origin. The authors of the study suggested that the Huns were descended from Xiongnu who expanded westwards and mixed with Sakas. Nepritsky et al. 2019 examined the remains of 3 males from 3 separate 5th-century Hunnic cemeteries in the Pannonian Basin. They were found to be carrying the paternal haplogroups Q1A2, R1b1A1b1A1A1 and R1A1A1b2A2. In modern Europe, Q1A2 is rare and has its highest frequency among the Shekalis. The haplogroup Q is common in Native American, Samoyedic and Yeniseian populations. All of the Hunnic males studied were determined to have had brown eyes and black or brown hair, and to have been of mixed European and East Asian ancestry. The results were consistent with the Xiongnu origin of the Huns. In an interdisciplinary study, Savalayev and Jiang 2020 found no clear evidence of continuity between the Xiongnu and the Huns, and concluded that no genetic evidence suggests that the steppe component of the Huns was derived from the Xiongnu or other populations of the eastern steppe. Kaiser et al. 2020 found that the Xiongnu shared certain paternal and maternal haplotypes with the Huns, and suggested on this basis that the Huns were descended from Xiongnu, who they in turn suggested were descended from Scytho-Siberians. History. Before Attila, the Romans became aware of the Huns when the latter's invasion of the Pontic steppes forced thousands of Goths to move to the lower Danube to seek refuge in the Roman Empire in 376. The Huns conquered the Alans, most of the Greutungi or Eastern Goths, and then most of the Thervini or Western Goths, with many fleeing into the Roman Empire. In 395 the Huns began their first large-scale attack on the Eastern Roman Empire. Huns attacked in Thrace, overran Armenia, and pillaged Cappadocia. They entered parts of Syria, threatened Antioch, and passed through the province of Euphratesia. At the same time, the Huns invaded the Sasanian Empire. This invasion was initially successful, coming close to the capital of the empire at Ctesiphon. However, they were defeated badly during the Persian counterattack. During their brief diversion from the Eastern Roman Empire, the Huns may have threatened tribes further west. Uldan, the first Hun identified by name in contemporary sources, headed a group of Huns and Alans fighting against Radagaisus in defense of Italy. Uldan was also known for defeating Gothic rebels giving trouble to the East Romans around the Danube and beheading the Goth Gainas around 400 to 401. The East Romans began to feel the pressure from Uldan's Huns again in 408. Uldan crossed the Danube and pillaged Thrace. The East Romans tried to buy Uldan off, but his sum was too high, so they instead bought off Uldan's subordinates. This resulted in many desertions from Uldan's group of Huns. Uldan himself escaped back across the Danube, after which he is not mentioned again. Hunnish mercenaries are mentioned on several occasions being employed by the East and West Romans, as well as the Goths, during the late 4th and 5th century. In 433 some parts of Pannonia were ceded to them by Flavius Aetius, the Magister Militum of the Western Roman Empire. Under Attila. From 434 the brothers Attila and Bleda ruled the Huns together. Attila and Bleda were as ambitious as their uncle Ruhila. In 435 they forced the Eastern Roman Empire to sign the Treaty of Margus, giving the Huns trade rights and an annual tribute from the Romans. When the Romans breached the treaty in 440, Attila and Bleda attacked Castra Constantias, a Roman fortress and marketplace on the banks of the Danube. War broke out between the Huns and Romans, and the Huns overcame a weak Roman army to raise the cities of Margus, Singidunum, and Viminacium. Although a truce was concluded in 441, 2 years later Constantinople again failed to deliver the tribute and war resumed. In the following campaign, Hun armies approached Constantinople and sacked several cities before defeating the Romans at the Battle of Chersonesus. The Eastern Roman Emperor Theodosius II gave in to Hun demands and in autumn 443 signed the Peace of Anatolius with the two Hun kings. Bleda died in 445, and Attila became the sole ruler of the Huns. In 447, Attila invaded the Balkans and Thrace. The war came to an end in 449 with an agreement in which the Romans agreed to pay Attila an annual tribute of 2,100 pounds of gold. Throughout their raids on the Eastern Roman Empire, the Huns had maintained good relations with the Western Empire. However, Honoria, sister of the Western Roman Emperor Valentinian III, sent Attila a ring and requested his help to escape her betrothal to a senator. Attila claimed her as his bride and half the Western Roman Empire as dowry. Additionally, a dispute arose about the rightful heir to a king of the Salian Franks. In 451, Attila's forces entered Gaul. Once in Gaul, the Huns first attacked Metz, then his armies continued westwards, passing both Paris and Troyes to lay siege to Orléans. Flavius Aetius was given the duty of relieving Orléans by Emperor Valentinian III. A combined army of Roman and Visigoths then defeated the Huns at the Battle of the Catalaunian Plains. The following year, Attila renewed his claims to Honoria and territory in the Western Roman Empire. Leading his army across the Alps and into northern Italy, he sacked and razed a number of cities. Hoping to avoid the sack of Rome, Emperor Valentinian III sent 3 envoys, the high civilian officers Gennadius Abienus and Trigetius, as well as Pope Leo I, who met Attila at Mincio in the vicinity of Mantua, and obtained from him the promise that he would withdraw from Italy and negotiate peace with the emperor. The new Eastern Roman Emperor Marcian then halted tribute payments, resulting in Attila planning to attack Constantinople. However, in 453 he died of a hemorrhage on his wedding night. After Attila's death in 453, the Hunnic Empire faced an internal power struggle between its vassalized Germanic peoples and the Hunnic ruling body. Led by Elik, Attila's favored son and ruler of the Akatsiri, the Huns engaged the Gepid king Ardaric at the Battle of Nidau, who led a coalition of Germanic peoples to overthrow Hunnic imperial authority. The Amali Goths would revolt the same year under Valamir, allegedly defeating the Huns in a separate engagement. However, this did not result in the complete collapse of Hunnic power in the Carpathian region, but did result in the loss of many of their Germanic vassals. At the same time, the Huns were also dealing with the arrival of more Oghur Turkic-speaking peoples from the east, including the Oghurs, Saragurs, Onagurs, and the Sabirs. In 463, the Saragurs defeated the Akatsiri, or Akatir Huns, and asserted dominance in the Pontic region. The Western Huns under Dengizic experienced difficulties in 461, when they were defeated by Valamir in a war against the Sadages, a people allied with the Huns. His campaigning was also met with dissatisfaction from Ernik, ruler of the Akatsiri Huns, who wanted to focus on the incoming Oghur-speaking peoples. Dengizic attacked the Romans in 467, without the assistance of Ernik. He was surrounded by the Romans and besieged, and came to an agreement that they would surrender if they were given land and his starving forces given food. During the negotiations, a Hun in service of the Romans named Chelchul persuaded the enemy Goths to attack their Hun overlords. The Romans, under their general Aspar and with the help of his Bucellarii, then attacked the quarreling Goths and Huns, defeating them. In 469, Dengizic was defeated and killed in Thrace. After Dengizic's death, the Huns seem to have been absorbed by other ethnic groups such as the Bulgars. Kim, however, argues that the Huns continued under Ernik, becoming the Kutrigar and Utigar Huno-Bulgars. This conclusion is still subject to some controversy. Some scholars also argue that another group identified in ancient sources as Huns, the North Caucasian Huns, were genuine Huns. The rulers of various post-Hunnic steppe peoples are known to have claimed descent from Attila in order to legitimize their right to the power, and various steppe peoples were also called Huns by Western and Byzantine sources from the 4th century onward.